Welcome back to Another Thing. I'm Larry Menti. The 2016 presidential election was like no other in history. And don't think the weirdness is going to stop just because we have results in. There's a recount. The electors still have to meet. To help us navigate through all of that is Joe Patten, who is an associate professor of political science here at Monmouth University. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Larry. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about this recount. There's part of it that seems so odd. The person asking for the recount, at least initially, had 1% of the vote. It's not like she can overturn the election so she wins. What's going on?
Yeah, and she also had to raise about $7 million, which is more than she raised in her presidential campaign in order to do it. So there are the three states. Wisconsin is underway. Michigan and Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is going to be much more difficult to recount. If you look at previous recounts, there's no reason to suspect that it's going to change the result in any of these states.
So why do it?
Well, I think there were some early reports that suggested that some of the machines might have been hacked and that maybe Donald Trump was performing 7% better in districts where there wasn't a paper trail. I think that fueled some speculation. There were some hacks during the election of the DNC, and even Arizona and Illinois had their voter-based registrations hacked, presumably by Russia. In 2014, Russia hacked the elections in Ukraine. So I think given that backdrop and given the sense that there was, from supporters, a push to do this, but I don't think there's anybody who seriously expects that this is going to have an impact on this race.
So can some good come from this, though?
Well,
or is it just a wasted exercise?
No, well, I don't think the impact from this exercise will be felt in this election. I think in previous recounts in Wisconsin and other states, there was a difference of about 230 votes. So she needs to make up over 10,000 votes in Michigan, 22,000 votes in Wisconsin, about 70,000 in Pennsylvania. But the impact could be in elections going forward. About 1 in 4 votes in the country right now are taking place in voting booths that don't leave a paper trail and that are vulnerable to hacking.
Will this affect the Electoral College at all? I mean, are the votes now being held up in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, and those electors won't be able to vote in the Electoral College?
The electors have to vote on December 19th. They have to be sent to Washington by the 28th, and I believe they're counted on January 6th. So those deadlines have to be met, and so that's one of the reasons, perhaps, why in Wisconsin they declined Jill Stein's request to do a hand count by paper ballot and instead to do a less labor-intensive process.
So there'll be no constitutional crisis. And by the way, the December 13th deadline was because of the last time we had this mess in 2000 with Al Gore and George Bush.
That was the hanging chads and the paper ballots, which is which does link to today, because it was because of that, the hanging chads, that the federal government in the Help America Vote Act made a push for states and gave funding to states to incentivize to get more modern technology in voting. And now, as it turns out, that the technology has kind of gone to these kind of like touch screens, almost ATM-like machines for voting. One study that was just done said about like 43 states, those machines are between 10 and 15 years old, which would not be a problem if it was one of those old school machines where you pull a lever down. Those are like old Buicks that can go for 50 years. But these touchscreen machines are different, right? Like you don't see too many people in society using a 10 to 15-year-old laptop.
Right. And so what are you looking for? Do you think they should upgrade that? I mean, is it possible at this point, if you made it more digital, if you connected it to the internet, wouldn't that make them more hackable?
Well, there have been some studies that have been done that with some graduate students and even in Princeton that are able to hack a machine in about 7 minutes. There's there's several best practices. And New Jersey's pretty bad at this. But one is to have a paper trail, right? So that if there is some kind of malware put into a system, you could always check it against the paper trail. It's like a receipt. A cash register will give you a receipt. And you could count that and measure that against to see if there's been any hacking going on. The second is, and no state right now uses online or goes on the internet to do, but there are some states that go online to transport their voting results to their capitals.
So the bottom line, with all our advancements in technology, the safest way, the way that would prevent hacking, that would prevent fraud, is probably a paper ballot?
That's it. Yeah, right. Because and you don't have to be kind of a super KGB spy to figure out how to do it. You just need access to the machine, put in some malware into the software. That could also not be detected before the election and could disappear after the election. So the only way to really test that is to go old school and count the paper ballots. A lot of countries in Europe still go with the paper ballot. That's really the only sure way to test.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. Everything old is new again.
That's true.
Joe Patten, Associate Professor of Political Science at Monmouth University. Paper ballots, who knew? When Another Thing continues. Dawn is up.